do that. And that'll overcome their video. And then how about knocking it off? We'll do the same thing. We'll go back to the blank and then they do the video. What if they see all my pimples? You're already into the microphone. Is he up there already?
Hey, welcome back, everybody.
He has his intro.
Our next speaker is Dr. C.V. Tramont.
Did he tell me when?
When Dr. Tramont completed his tour after Desert Storm,
He's going to be over this
he
side.
became familiar with the work of Brian Weiss. And some of you may know that work because it went very deeply into the realities of reincarnation.
He speaks fluent Russian.
And the ramifications of what that means to all of us and what it can mean. And Dr. Tramont got really excited about this healing potential, and he set out to prove or disprove to himself just how powerful was this idea of reincarnation, and just how much could it actually heal. And when I read his new book, From Birth to Rebirth, guys, I started turning the pages. I went through the night. I didn't put it down. I didn't sleep the night. I read it cover to cover.
I got so many.
Exciting book.
11 altogether.
I called him the next morning.
9
I
and
said,
2 stepkids.
would you please consider coming and discussing your journey and your discoveries with the Congress? And you know what? We're all really fortunate because he said yes. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. C.V. Tramont.
He's calling me? Thanks a lot, Bob. I guess there are people out there. Okay. Well, good afternoon. My name's Chuck Tramont. Okay. Microphone people. I need an elevation here. I'll try a little louder. My name's Chuck Tramont, and yes, I am a physician. And you notice I didn't say retired physician. And the reason is I'm still caring for patients. If one includes the time I spent in training in obstetrics and gynecology, my many years in practice, and the several years I was on active duty with the Air Force during a couple of wars, one could say I've been a hands-on doc for 38 years. And during that time, I performed thousands of surgeries, delivered thousands of babies. And I tell you this to shine a light on the contrast to what I'm doing now. And what I'm doing now may challenge the belief system of many of you. It comes under the heading of past life regression therapy. Many will ask, why am I doing this kind of work? My answer is very simple, because it works. It works so well that I find that I am quite passionate about what I do, and I get as big a thrill from changing people's lives for the better as I did bringing healthy new lives into this world in spite of medical complications. Material that I'm going to present may truly shock some of your belief systems. However, you must understand that this material is what my research has brought forth. It came from my patients, not from me. So I ask you to be open-minded and try to understand why work like this can excite one and make one passionate about carrying out this kind of therapy. Most people in this room have heard about alien abductions, am I right? Well, today I'm going to cover a good bit of information which comes from my patients under deep hypnosis. And a large part of the material I'm going to present is going to present not only a new wrinkle for many of you, but it may blow the minds of some of you. And what I'm speaking about here is alien attachments. Extraterrestrial beings who in some way attach themselves to a living human being without their knowledge, so as to carry out an agenda. Quite often it follows an alien abduction, but not always. Before we get into this rather exciting and unusual arena, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about what I do. Why do people come to me? Well, the simplest is number one, which would be to eliminate fears, phobias, anxieties, as well as undesirable habits, addictive tendencies that are detrimental to one's physical and emotional health and vitality. This can be accomplished with deep hypnosis and very positive suggestions to the subconscious. I hate when it does that. To resolve emotional and physical problems. This can be helped by utilizing, again, deep hypnosis and positive suggestions. However, if regression techniques are included as part of this therapy, the success rate of eliminating emotional and physical problems escalates dramatically. Why is this so? Simply because the subconscious mind is a virtual reservoir of complete and intricately detailed memories of one's life experiences, regardless of when they occurred, whether it be the present or the past. These experiences are like computer programs that condition our physical and emotional responses to everything life has to offer, everything that comes through to our consciousness through our senses. The subconscious mind not only recalls every moment of every life you've ever lived, but also integrates this information so that it interfaces and many times overrides our conscious thoughts by giving us a specific attitude and emotional feeling about everything in life, thus laying the groundwork of our personality and giving credence to the idea that we are the sum total of all our previous personalities. Of paramount importance here is the fact that the distinction of time when an event took place is conspicuously absent when the subconscious mind files these memories away. So in some ways, we're like robots, giving in to the easier thought that may have been laid down for us centuries ago. Therefore, a recall of a negative incident, which was filed away with a lot of emotion hundreds of years ago, can affect the subconscious to the same degree as something which has just occurred, thus allowing the faulty, negative programming to affect a person's conscious mind and dominate their present personal life without really relating to it. 3, to rid themselves of nightmares, to explain the meaning of recurrent dreams. 4, to explain deja vu feelings. This is when you have this unbelievable feeling of intense familiarity with a person, a place, a thing, or an activity, when there really hasn't been any experience relating to it to account for it. 5, to resolve relationship issues. 6, to understand and remove blocks to a person's moving forward, both in his professional and personal life. 7, to deal with grief. 8, there are always those who are just curious, who want to know more about other lifetimes and talents they may have had in other lifetimes, or just experience time travel. What do I find to be the major causes of these feelings and problems? My research has shown that people's feelings and their physical and emotional problems are due to one or both of 2 specific situations. The first has to do with the resurgence of a very emotional memory that was previously buried very deeply in the subconscious mind. This rather prominent memory resurfaced to the forefront of the subconscious mind because of an event or a group of events that occurred in one's present life that acted as a trigger. This very emotional memory is now in a position to unknowingly program the conscious mind in a very adverse way. This negative programming has a definite effect upon a person's emotions and physiologic body functions, resulting in undue suffering. A good example is that of a man who is in his 50s that I saw. This individual could never speak to a person he didn't know without panicking. I mean, his hands would shake, his voice would shake, he'd stutter, he'd have instant palpitations, perspiration, hyperventilation, you name it. The guy was a mess. He had been to many doctors for many years, psychiatrists, all types of therapists. Nobody could even come up with a diagnosis. The guy's in his 50s. Obviously, this limited him tremendously in a personal and professional way. I simply took him back to the cause. He went back to the 1920s. He's a 5-year-old boy playing outside his grandfather's house. His parents had been killed in an accident, so he lives with his grandfather. A sedan pulls up. A man and a woman are in the car. They ask for directions. As he approaches the vehicle, they grab him and they kidnap him. Now he's in an abandoned farmhouse, and they're trying to extract money from his grandfather. Well, he has no money, so they give up and they finally leave. The little boy finds his way to a road, gets picked up by a trucker. The police get him, and they finally take him home. And now his grandfather looks at him and said, "From this day forward, you will never speak to strangers." And from that moment on, that very emotional memory was engraved deeply into his subconscious mind. Something in his present life triggered it, and it probably was the first stranger he ever met. I spoke to his wife several weeks after. This guy was happier than you could ever imagine. He opened 2 businesses. She said he spoke to more people today than he has in his entire life. I have found that the other major cause of people's problems is directly related to attached entities. That's right, entities who are attached. I find that I'm always learning in this business, and I run into surprises at every turn of the road. My first encounter with an attached entity, and I didn't know beans about attached entities when I was involved in this, was by accident. What I was doing was I was regressing this individual who was a writer, but he had a block in his writing, and he had this tremendous interest in feudal Japanese culture, their fighting and their literature and all this business. It seemed to interfere with him, so I took him back to the cause of his interest in this. Went back to a life as a Japanese feudal farmer's son, about 16, 17 years old, wanted to join the Emperor's army, and so he did. Now he's marching with the Emperor's army, and this individual I'm regressing, his name was Edgar. And so all of a sudden I heard these tremendous horse hoof beats coming through the ranks, and a bunch of very fierce-looking guys on horses with spears came in, and he caught a spear in the abdomen. Now he's dying in the mud, and he's really upset. He's yelling out, "Where's the honor? I never got to fight." And then he says, "And Edgar won't do what I want him to do." And I felt like saying, "Excuse me?" And then all of a sudden it dawned on me, and I said, "Well, how long have you been with him?" He said, 3 years, since he was 3 years old. That was my baptism of fire. I stumbled through the session. I finally achieved resolution by sending this individual, this entity, to the light. And then I started learning as much as I could about spirit releasement therapy. And it's quite a complicated situation. I soon devised methods where I could identify and rid the patient of these entities. As time went on, I soon came to the conclusion that if one is to carry on comprehensive past life regression therapy, he must also be prepared to carry out releasement of all attached entities. My research has yielded results which are very similar to the great pioneer of spirit releasement, the late Dr. William Baldwin. He believed there were many different types of entities, both human and non-human. The human ones seem to imprint their emotional and physical ailments upon the host. The non-human entities are there for the purposes of completing their agenda. Many times the patient's issues are due to both. Let's have slide 1, please. The most common attached human entities include earthbound spirit attachments. These are disembodied human spirits. They're the consciousness that survives after a person dies. The spirit declines going to the light, and joins the living person for various reasons. Next, there are mind or soul fragments. These are fragmentations of a living person's consciousness that have separated from that individual and did not return, but rather attached to another person. These usually are from traumatic circumstances. For instance, a little girl being molested, say sexually. All of a sudden, part of her consciousness goes out of body and is across the room watching from the other side, unemotionally involved. And many times that fragment doesn't return. Dr. Baldwin also got into many things like subpersonalities and alter personalities and past life personalities. I'm not going to cover those because it's going to be too much, and we want to keep it relatively easy to understand, and besides there's a lot of material here that's very interesting to you. The next would be terminated pregnancies, and I'm sure there are a lot of nurses who assisted on abortions who are probably loaded with these souls that have attached to them. And then we have the non-human entities, and in there we've got the extraterrestrial beings, and we've got dark force entities, and we're going to get into those in pretty good detail. Before I go on, I just have to share a comment from a cousin who's somewhat of a comedian. After I explain what I'm presently doing, he looks at me kind of funny and says, "So you went from baby doctor to witch doctor?" What happens when I see patients? Okay, well, I carry out a lengthy interview, at which time I have the patient describe his or her issues in great detail. Then I develop an impression or feeling regarding their belief system and how open they are to reincarnation. In the process of doing this, I talk about the validation of reincarnation, historical validation, the phenomenon of xenoglossy, where individuals speak a foreign language unknown to them, and the almost identical descriptions of the afterlife that come from millions of people who've been regressed, and also millions of people who've had near-death experiences. And then, of course, there are also regressing two individuals unbeknownst to each other to the same lifetime and identifying the same scenario. I then explain my philosophy and beliefs regarding physical and emotional problems. And I truly believe every physical and every emotional problem has an emotional cause, and it's buried deep in the subconscious. And once you are able to air that out to the conscious mind, who makes a distinction of time and a decision, rational decision, the patient's able to release the effect. I let the patient know that they'll be protected from any physical or emotional discomfort through my suggestions, and I will also have spiritual protection for them by filling them full of light. I'll inform the patient I'll be working through their higher self, and I'll have them call forth their spirit guide so I may communicate with them. Unless I'm asked, I really don't discuss entity attachments during the interview. Rather, I ask the patient to be open to what occurs, to stay relaxed, and kind of go with the flow. I do this purposely, so as not to lead him. Most patients are very surprised when we discover attachments. And I discuss this thoroughly following the session. I find that this technique adds an element of candor and genuineness to the process. I also then discuss hypnosis, the process of deepening, since most patients have never been hypnotized, about 99% of them. I then gently take the patient into the altered state of deep hypnosis and attempt to communicate with their spirit guide through the patient. The guide speaks through the patient. Any entity speaks through the patient. And the patient will wonder, where did that come from? Let's have slide 2, please. Why do I like working through the patient's spirit guide? Well, the spirit guide is a non-physical being who's agreed to volunteer or be assigned to an incarnated human being for the purpose of helping him. Many such guides are sent from the light to help and advise when advice is requested. Many of these guides seem to specialize in specific situations in people's lives, but there's usually one special guide that comes forth when you call for them in an altered state of consciousness. And these guides are not attached, and they have their own source of energy. Once the patient has been hypnotically taken to their higher self, and I have them go to their higher self because that's where their greatest wisdom resides, I then have them call forth their guide. I communicate then through the patient. It's kind of a form of channeling. I ask for the guide's name and ask if he'll be willing to help resolve the patient's problems. They usually have unconditional love for this individual. The guides appear to retain their human personalities as well. Some are humorous, some are all business. Most are very cooperative. Some make it clear that it would not be in the best interest of the patient to revisit that lifetime at this time. Heck, I've even been admonished for continuing extensive questioning, being told that I'm diverting energy from its proper place. I'd like now to tell you about a way in which I was able to prove to myself that these spirit guides are truly genuine and the information they provide is accurate. Before I tell you about this, though, before I tell you how I designed the model for this spirit guide experiment, I'd like to give you some background related to one of my earliest cases, one that became a catalyst that helped catapult me right into past life regression therapy. This case involved a 48-year-old GYN patient of mine. I saw her for the first time, and she said she was having these recurrent nightmares that were going on for many, many years, and they were getting worse and more frequent, and she'd wake up screaming. I thought this would be a good one to regress, and she was very willing, and we then took her back under deep hypnosis to the cause of the problem. She went back to at least 6 lifetimes, and they were all related to the nightmares and the phobias. And by, again, airing out these events to her conscious mind, she was able to realize these occurrences were all in the past, had nothing to do with her present life, and was able to release the effect. And the negative programming was wiped out. And she was no longer having any problems with nightmares or anxiety or phobias. But the big thing here is the follow-up research showed an uncanny accuracy in matching historical dates and events of all her lifetimes. And if this wasn't impressive enough, she exhibited xenoglossy, speaking a foreign language she didn't know. In her particular case, it was ancient Gaelic. Several months following my retirement from my OB/GYN practice, I received a call from this patient. It seems that she was consciously having flashback memories of a medieval life with me. I've had many patients who've had lives with me, and I truly believe nothing happens by coincidence. And I've just got to mention, too, that I was told by Nicole yesterday, and I just met this lady. This lady I had met, and she knew my mother, and we're going back 55 years ago, and she's here today. So nothing happens by coincidence. Anyway, in this lifetime, she was my half-sister from a village on the coast of France. It was near Cherbourg. I was a count who afforded protection for the entire village. She described the heraldry on my shield as a white cross with red and black sections alternating and a rampant lion. I kind of laughed a little bit because I remember when I was very young, I painted my first bike red and black. My sports car was red and black, and so on. She related 2 visions which had come to her. First, she saw me assembling my knights and leaving for the Crusades. Secondly, she saw me not returning, and the village being overrun by my rival power. Having validated the historical accuracy of all her past lifetimes that we encountered, I really tended to believe that we truly shared this life. Also, this revelation kind of shed light on why I've always collected medieval weapons and depictions of knighthood. My home and office are filled with this kind of stuff. The experiment that I decided to carry out to prove that these guides were genuine and truly knowledgeable centered around my asking the same question to 9 separate patients' guides. My question was, can you see my spirit guide? And if you can, describe him or her. 8 of the 9 guides described my spirit guide as a medieval knight, and the 9th was close. 6 of the 9 volunteered that the spirit guide was in the same life with me, and during a battle jumped in front of me and took a death blow for me. I then decided to ask all these guides to describe me in that lifetime, and I got it all back again. I was a French knight, Silver Cross, red and black, the rampant lion, and so on. I once again decided to call this patient, who now told me she had a lucid dream in which my guide visited her. As she relayed the events of the dream, I felt the hair go up on the back of my neck. She told me that my guide appeared to her in medieval clothes and told her that he was also present in that life that we shared. He stated he was a French nobleman that joined forces with me on that long march to the Crusades. We became very close and made a mutual pact to protect each other in the Holy War. This pact became a reality as he later took that death blow that was meant for me. In my mind, this experiment under hypnosis proves that these guides are very, very real and authentic. By questioning the spirit guide, I'm able to acquire valuable information about the patient, including whether foreign energy is present and the details regarding the type of attachments and the effect that they're having on the patient. Slide 3. I'm also able to obtain confirmation of the events that occur during entity and especially dark force entity releasement, which entails invoking the help of the warrior angels of light and the legions of heaven to surround and protect.
Keep talking, just keep talking.
Both myself and the patient. In other words, we set up a perimeter defense. That's Air Force language. Slide 4, please. I then call on the rescue spirits of light and ask them to encapsulate all dark force entities into a capsule of light, squeeze down and hold them in abeyance. Slide 5, please. Once that is accomplished, I invoke the help of Michael the Archangel to please remove them and take them to that special place in the light that he takes them, that usually allows them to be rehabilitated if he feels that's what should happen. I leave that decision strictly to him. Dark forces will often, well, they're very deceptive, but they will often pretend to be a spirit guide. I've run into this many times. So I always test them. According to William Baldwin in his book, Healing Lost Souls, there's a command hierarchy of dark force entities. He states that all dark force entities are threatened with pain, punishment, and annihilation if they disobey their commanders or fail an assignment. They believe without question and blindly obey the commands of their superiors. They're indoctrinated with 3 fundamental deceptions. They have no light at their center, they can cease to exist, and the light is harmful. You can cut that now. With this in mind, I designed a simple test to determine the authenticity of the guide. I tell the entity that I'm immediately sending you a gift of light. Will you accept it? If it's a dark force, you're not going to hear an answer or you're going to hear no. A guide will always accept the gift of light. Spirit guides are very helpful in taking patients back to the events that have caused their problems. And when advice is requested under hypnosis, they often come forth with excellent, tremendous suggestions for the patients. On several occasions, I run into a spirit guide who's not as sharp or as knowledgeable as I'd like to see. When this occurs, I'll ask for a more experienced guide to step forward and help. For the most part, this has been very successful. On one occasion, I witnessed the spirit guide's panic reaction. It was one time where we had thousands of dark forces, and the procedure took an hour or so to get rid of them. And the guide yelled out, "There's too many of them, there's too many of them." So I simply said, call in reinforcements. Tell the rescue spirits of light to add more power. A short while later, the dark forces were finally gone and the spirit guide regained her composure. If I suspect that attached entities and especially dark forces are present, I try really hard to get to the spirit guide. If the initial call for the spirit guide fails, then what I do is I regress the patient into a lifetime take them through the death experience, get into the afterlife, and then I go for the guide. And oftentimes you'll catch them there, and that's very successful. But even sometimes there, it isn't. And when that happens, I have another thing that I do. I call for a certain volunteer spirit guide by the name of Abel. Some time ago, Abel introduced himself to me as a spirit guide from one particular patient. I was very impressed with this one, and soon discovered he was very close to being a master spirit. This is a spirit who's quite elevated, doesn't have to incarnate any longer, and strictly would like to help people. I decided to ask his advice and say, you know, how does this happen? When I suspect dark forces, what are they doing? Why can I not get to the guide? And he says the more powerful dark force entities create a fog-like mist, which prevents the guide from coming through. So I said, so what do I do? He said, call me. And I have. He's come through about 18 times. But even with Abel, there has been some times he hasn't been able to get through. So we run into some pretty powerful dark forces. In one particular case, a patient heard a voice saying, "You're not getting through." I thought long and hard about the several cases that Abel could not even get through, and I ended up devising even another way to use the volunteer spirit guide. But this time it would be through another subject during the same session. I initially set up this experimental session with a patient I had seen on 3 occasions without reaching his spirit guide. This guy had been plagued with negative, destructive thoughts, suicide, and other things for quite some time. I definitely suspected dark forces, and finally on the 3rd visit was able to communicate with one of them. And I said, "What's your purpose?" And I heard, "Darkness and to live." So I used this volunteer subject that had an easily accessible spirit guide and carried out simultaneous hypnosis of the 2 individuals side by side on separate couches. In using this dual hypnosis, the patient really has to agree to forego confidentiality in favor of a good result. I successfully used the volunteer subject spirit guide to monitor and confirm the presence and releasement of all the entities attached, including, according to the guide, a very powerful dark force entity. This particular case was kind of exciting, for when the volunteer subject spirit guide said that all of a sudden the powerful dark force entity now has placed talons around the patient's throat, the patient was seen to cough and choke. And this went on for a good 30 seconds. I called upon more archangels and master spirits to help and asked the rescue spirits of light to add more power. And about 30 seconds later, the patient stopped this choking. Several minutes later, I was told this powerful dark force was now encapsulated and removed by Michael the Archangel. Several weeks later, the patient informed me he had considered himself markedly improved in physical symptoms, attitude, feelings of despair, hopelessness, and avoidance of negativity. I have completed about 7 of these dual hypnotic sessions now on different patients, utilizing different volunteer subjects along with the patient. I've accomplished successful confirmation and the presence and releasement of all attached entities, including the dark forces. Again, I realize this material's got to really challenge your belief system, as it did mine. But I got to emphasize once again, this is what my research is coming up with. And it's part of my experience. And as regression therapy pioneer, Dick Sutphin always says, my experience is my reality. Slide 6, please. I would now like to discuss my experience with earthbound spirits and how they can affect the patient. Once again, the earthbound spirit attachment is disembodied human spirit, the consciousness of a person, of the consciousness that survives after death. This consciousness declines going to the light, remains in the lower astral plane, and may join somebody, another living person, for various reasons. Some of these reasons are self-serving, and some of them actually are to benefit the patient. For instance, a relative who wants to join a child who's having one heck of a time with very abusive parents or something of this sort. Earthbound spirits have thoughts and desires that now can interfere with the patient's thoughts and desires. Their physical and emotional ailments and addictive tendencies that were prominent in their lifetime are now imprinted right into the patient's mind and body. If the earthbound spirit was depressed in his lifetime, the patient most likely will undergo depression. If this attachment had chronic gastritis in his lifetime, this malady most likely will become the patient's problem as well. These earthbound spirits, when attached, are in reality parasitic infestations, as are all attachments. They're continually drawing energy from their host, regardless of their reasons for attaching. Some earthbound spirits may join the subject with very sincere intentions of helping him with his earthly problems, and truly they may be helpful. This often poses a problem when it comes to releasement of the entity. Slide 7 now, please. Earthbound spirits themselves may also have attachments. I have found that it is usually a dark force that will attach to them. If the earthbound spirits have dark forces attached, they and the patient both will be affected by this dark, destructive influence. The earthbound can now become very hostile, especially in regard to leaving the patient and going to the light. It's essential to remove these entities, the dark forces, before achieving the cooperation of the earthbound and sending them to the light voluntarily. You can remove that now. Earthbound spirits also retain many of their human qualities. I just got to tell you about the instances of snitching that I've run across. When a patient has several earthbound attachments, I'll usually interview each one, unless we've got hundreds. And even then I'll say, well, the one who's got the depression, please step forward, and then we'll go down the line. And I had one that, well, I've had several of these that happen, but I'll ask this one particular one, did you ever experience chronic anxiety in your lifetime? And I'll hear, no, but Betty did, you know, and that'll be the next one over. So, you know, these earthbound spirits seem to resemble a family with knowledge of each other's secrets and weaknesses. And they're not really adverse to engaging in gossip. Another interesting case involving earthbounds has to do with a woman who was so afraid of people gathered together, in other words, crowds, that she would refuse to wait in line, walk into a crowded elevator, drive in traffic that's heavy. During a session, I found an earthbound spirit who was responsible for this claustrophobia. And I found it rather humorous when her son called me and said not only is she tremendously improved, but she purposely works her way into crowds so as to dare this anxiety to return. It didn't. Okay, is it possible to re-script a past life? In other words, rewrite history. I'd like you to pay close attention to the details of this next case. Keeping in mind that time is a construct of the physical world and supposedly not present in the spiritual dimension, which means the past, present, and future are all happening simultaneously. Thus, this case is going to pose a troubling question for which you really don't have any answer, at least in this dimension. The patient came to me with a serious alcohol addiction. I uncovered the presence of Peter, an earthbound spirit who had a long history of drinking and died of alcohol-related liver problems. I was unable to get the patient's guide, but I was successful in using the earthbound spirit Peter's spirit guide. Sometimes you have to be extra creative here, to monitor and confirm Peter's ascent to the light. Following that session, my patient had no further desire for alcohol, and a month later was still alcohol-free and much happier in his marriage. During that same original session, I also took this patient back to a life with his wife, his present-day wife. He went back to a life in the 1920s. He recognized his wife as his girlfriend in that lifetime named Alice. The patient's name in that lifetime was Gregory, who, by the way, also had a drinking problem. Well, Gregory's drinking caused Alice a lot of pain, so much so that she said, "That's it, I've had it." She left him permanently. And I then discovered that our old friend, the earthbound spirit Peter, the one with a long history of drinking that we sent to the light, was also attached to him in that life as well. And his guide was there also, so I used his guide again. And I attempted to remove Peter once again, but this time he was very belligerent. I suspected dark force entities attached to Peter and confirmed this with his guide. They were definitely there. Peter then helped me remove the his guide helped me remove the dark force entities. And I was now easily able to convince Peter to go to light a second time. Gregory underwent an unbelievable change in that lifetime and became very free from alcohol, just like he did in his present life. And he once again pursued Alice, and they soon married and had a very happy life. Now I got a question for you. Would that lifetime in the 1920s have turned out differently if Peter, the alcohol-addicted, earthbound spirit attachment, had been allowed to stay attached to Gregory? Remember, the past, present, and future lifetimes are supposedly happening simultaneously. By removing entities in that past lifetime, we may have changed past events, re-scripted that lifetime, thus altering history. You decide. Is there really a battle raging between good and evil, and how real are the dark force entities? I definitely believe there's a very definite battle going on between good and evil forces in this world. My research leads me to believe that the dark force entities are very real. In my mind, their mission is seduction and destruction. They're very hostile, they're quite obscene, and they're often responsible for very negative thoughts, including thoughts of suicide. Vulnerability to this infestation by dark forces can occur with drug use, excessive alcohol, and intense negative emotional feelings, sexual interaction with one who has these entities, a whole raft of other situations. And the dark forces also seem to know when they're in danger of being discovered. I say this because I have very often seen patients whom I subsequently found dark forces on them and removed them, get lost and be unable to find their way to the appointment, or have some problem develop. I remember a husband and wife they had developed pains prior to coming. They said, maybe we shouldn't go, but they came anyway. And I kind of laughed because I've seen this so often. And my work is definitely getting the attention of these dark forces. And I'll show you why I say that. I had a middle-aged woman who in the early part of this year obviously had many dark entities present. As soon as she entered into deep hypnosis, she was writhing and wiggling all over the couch with occasional growls and snarls. And then all of a sudden, she sat up, nose to nose with me, eyes fluttering because she's still under very deep hypnosis, and his voice came out and says, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm the guy who's going to get rid of you." And I put her back down, and we went ahead with what we had to do. Another case this year involved a woman from South America. I successfully removed several dark force entities from her, and the next day she came in. I was going to work with her husband. She informed me, she said, "I just have to tell you, but right before you remove those entities, I heard a voice. And the voice kept saying, 'He's getting across, he's getting across.'" What I do is, when I know I'm up against some dark forces, I walk over from my chair to another table, and I pick up a crucifix that I've had since the 4th grade. This kind of lets the dark forces know where I stand and adds power to the process. So it's obvious they're watching me too, and they know exactly what I'm doing. Next case has to do with a powerful dark force entity. Involved a male patient who had been told by a shaman he had spirits attached to him. He was extremely nervous and felt that something didn't want him to proceed with what we were doing. Being unsuccessful at connecting with the patient's spirit guide, I found myself communicating with an entity by the name of Joseph. He tells me that there are thousands of dark force entities. I wasn't sure who I was dealing with, so I asked, tell me, what's your purpose in being here? He said, oh, I'd love to do this. So immediately I knew I was dealing with a dark force here. I called for Abel, the spirit guide that I told you about from another patient, and he showed up. He answered by speaking to the patient and said, hey, yeah, we indeed have several thousand dark forces present. Using the usual protocol, we confirmed the removal of all dark force entities, except for 4, including Joseph, who Abel now tells me is a very powerful dark force entity. I then invoked the help of all the archangels and many master spirits. I threw everybody into the battle. The battle went on for quite a while. It was like an hour and a half or so. I was finally told by Abel that the dark force entities were gone. However, Joseph, the very powerful one in their hierarchy, was rescued by the dark forces. I guess he was too important to be lost for them. And right about that moment, the patient exhibited a very evil smile. And the patient exhibits all these reactions from the entities that come through them. And I looked at this evil smile, and I asked Abel, I said, well, what's going on? He said, an extremely powerful dark force has now appeared. I said, is this one attached? He says, no. He says, he's everywhere and very difficult to get rid of. And all of a sudden, I heard this voice saying, you know me. We go back a long way. And then left. So I did the usual ceiling light, and that session ended. 4 weeks later, I saw a little 12-year-old girl who had several dark force entities. Using her guide to complete the process of releasement, I said, okay, are all the dark force entities removed? The answer I received was all but one, and he has a message for you. The message was, you know me. We will talk again. So I then asked Michael, the archangel, for answers. He said that a dark force entity, this particular dark force entity, has been a creature who I befriended when I was a knight centuries ago. The relationship deteriorated for unknown reasons, and he became extremely evil. So I'm not sure what all this means. I know that there's this battle, and I know I'm in it, and I'm in it to stay. I'm helping a lot of people, and I intend to help a lot more. I learned a long time ago, you just can't show fear, because they'll eat you up with the fear. I feel that my experience with spirit releasement is very similar to Dr. Baldwin's. Last year, I talked to his widow, Judith Baldwin, who's doing this kind of work. She said, as her husband continued to remove dark forces, he also ran into more powerful dark force entities. I use many of his techniques, and I add my own. Doing the same thing I did in surgery. I borrow tried and true techniques, add my own, and then do what works. I often find that one must also be creative in this work. Simple example would be a guy who I had was claustrophobic, and after the induction he woke up, and I re-induced him 2 more times. He kept waking up and he was panicking. He felt like he was going into a deep hole as he was being deepened. So I finally said, look, let me hold your hand and I'll guide you through. So I held his hand and he went right in. So just got to be creative, whatever you need to do. Slide 8, please. I think now it's time we talked about extraterrestrials and attachments of extraterrestrials. Again, my research is aligned with Dr. Baldwin's. Alien entities definitely have the technology and the ability to cross over dimensions and attach themselves to humans. I'll be the first to admit we don't know how it all works or exactly how they attach. However, my research is pretty exciting in that I'm able to communicate with them, and they tell me a lot. During my interview with one of my patients, who I'll call Jeffrey, he informed me that at the age of 13 he had a dream of being shot in the back with a gun. Following night he had another dream and he was shot in the back again. Well, this time it was with an arrow. When we took him back to the cause of this recurring dream, he began seeing beings that were not like people. He described them as being roughly tall, 8 feet tall, thin bodies, long arms, big heads. At that moment, the patient's spirit guide interrupted and explained that these beings were a group of 12 aliens who appeared to be doing something to Jeffrey's back. I then asked to communicate to whoever was in charge of this group of aliens and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm attaching myself by placing a 1-inch wide by 6-inch long organic tubular structure into a special area in this guy's back. It's just to the left of his vertebrae, and it's about 7 vertebrae up from the bottom vertebrae. The tube grabs onto skin and muscle, and the attachment is carried out through an energy transfer within our dimension. At this time, he is stunned or frozen by this energy, so he doesn't feel any pain. Only one of us is attached. The others here just feel his energy." The spirit guide once again interrupted and said that the insertion of that organic tube was the exact spot that Jeffrey had been shot in his back in his dreams. And I've heard of various other forms of attachments, and I think they're kind of species specific. This alien in charge then once again spoke, saying that we are Greys from the planet Nibiru. We're sent to watch over Jeffrey. They said he had been one of them until he decided to incarnate on Earth, his first incarnation as a human. And they're here to make him feel better and not be lonely. And they feel that Jeffrey hates it here. When I asked the alien leader for a description of life on Nibiru, he filled me in. I was told that it's bigger than Earth, mostly green, population around 80,000. Reproduction is through thought energy. Longevity is around 80 years old. There are no wars. Communication is telepathic. The diet consists mostly of greens. Digestive tract is similar, but you have a smaller mouth, smaller anus. The spirit guide corroborated that the patient was never on Earth before and had 3 lifetimes on Nibiru and about 87 lives on other planets. The guide also cleared up the fact, he said that the Gray's 80-year longevity is actually 800 Earth years. And following death, their soul ascends to the light, which is a bluish color. Another rather unusual description of life, you can take that off now, on a different planet, was experienced by a female patient who was regressed to being a male on a warm planet very close to its sun. He was a watcher of a path leading to a fortress. I put this particular story in my book. He has a long metal rod with a crystal at the top, which reflects the sun. He uses this rod to signal others that it's safe to cross the path. He watches for large carnivorous birds of prey that are attracted to the wristbands and necklaces worn by all inhabitants. The color of their bands represents their status. His is red and amber, the status of a watcher. The inhabitants are described as tall, about 7 feet, with burgundy eyes, pointed noses, long faces and chins. Their skin is gray. They have large, flat feet, since they travel only by walking. They have very flat teeth, since they subsist on fruits and vegetables. No one eats meat other than the birds. The inhabitants thrive on light reflected in crystals. They whisper, touch, and understand through this light. The crystals are also used for light and heat. And the fortress is a sanctuary for these people, so they may see the young birds that eventually get bigger and will eat them if they get knocked off the path into the valley. The birds are much more aggressive when people are on this path. This is because the birds are very protective of their young. Most of the time they won't bother people and will eat only other animals. And the people must always be aware of the birds, must never be careless. They must listen to the watchers, and no weapons are ever used against the birds. Offspring come about through sexual reproduction. There are no schools. The young must learn from the older ones. There is not much disease. However, some inhabitants become sick from the mountain air. The oceans are far away, but there are many streams to nourish the many plants, animals, and insects that reside there. When the inhabitants get old, they lose their body hair and eventually die, but are not buried since immediately they turn into dust. The subject was then taken through the death experience and went to the light. And of interest is the fact that the light from this planet was a purple color. Once again, we see the afterlight that aliens return to following death varies in color from the human experience and from other aliens, other species. Dr. Baldwin also encountered this situation. A rather complex but utterly fascinating attachment case centered around a young woman who manifested symptoms of missing time, nighttime paralysis, exceptionally low energy, a feeling that everything she's doing is for the purpose of somebody gathering information, and a feeling that the dark side is trying to interrupt her mission as a light worker. This patient's spirit guide confirmed the presence of one ET and several dark force entities. When I communicated with this extraterrestrial, he said his purpose was to hold the patient down and eventually bring her back to where she came from. He said, and I quote, "My powerful master is in charge and brought her here because of her skill in creating light in life forms, namely lattices of light in different colors and in different frequencies that help with the grid. The ley lines are lattice frames around portals that she opens, thus allowing the master's kind to come to earth. He has used her for this purpose for many lifetimes, the first of which was in Lemuria. I reattach after each incarnation so more may come for food and energy. The masters are a form of reptilian." Slide 9, please. "And they need humans to serve them. They cannot keep her for this purpose if she is not influenced by me. She was originally abducted from another star system. Now she reincarnates into this system to serve the reptilians. I am the robot sent here to keep her powers subdued. Attached dark forces are like parasites that also drain her energy and power and unknowingly help us. She is like a prisoner, yet she has a family of light beings who check on her. She and her family are trying to help people on earth ascend. It is their will to bring all the light beings home to a higher place in the hierarchy of the afterlife. This is done in spite of the fact that earth is a difficult place to bring light. She agreed to come here so as to bring more people to the light, but in order to do so, she had to accept the limitations that we placed on her. She felt she could reach more people even while being our captive and knowing that her family can't interfere at this time. She will return home when the reptilian influence is off of her." That was a very interesting quote that I got directly. I then asked her spirit guide, I said, "Hey, can Michael the Archangel remove this reptilian robot?" He says, "Yeah." Then I asked the patient, I said, "What's your decision?" She agreed, remove him. So we did. I then called in the special angels, and Michael the Archangel and the reptilian robot and the dark force entities were removed, and the spirit guide confirmed this, and then said, the problem on earth is that people become attached to these entities and won't let them go because they form part of their personality. She has to decide that this entity is not to be part of her and develop her own personality and like it. The entity makes her feel that she is to care for it and therefore nurture it. And she buys into this lie. She needs to understand that she is a beautiful being in herself. Her need to be needed is being used against her. It's a little codependency here. You can take that off now. Another rather interesting case involved an older man who said he felt paralyzed when he woke up on one of his birthdays. How's that for a birthday present? Several years ago. He was paralyzed to the point when he couldn't even open his eyes. However, he felt a feeling of total love and could see with inner vision. And he felt kisses from several faces and kept hearing happy birthday telepathically. We regressed him back to that scene. And he could see three beings about 5 feet tall with slender bodies, long faces, big eyes, wearing robes. They were bending over and kissing him. According to his guide, their purpose is to watch over him. He is a star child from Pleiades. And he was born into this life as part of the plan to help bring harmony to the people by changing their vibration towards love, which is a much higher vibration. Once he loves himself, his vibration will increase towards love and draw people to him. He can affect many, and there are many like him on earth. And when he dies and goes into spirit, he will notice his vibration is higher. And then he will return to Pleiades, as he has for all his earth lifetimes. His guide was also a Pleiadian, assigned to watch over him. A young woman came to me complaining of depression, excesses in drinking and smoking. It seems that she had a traumatic dream in her late teens. It was followed by nighttime paralysis. During this paralysis, she was hearing voices which were giving technical information, which was difficult for her to comprehend. And she was having feelings of not supposed to be here. All this made it very hard for her to move forward in life, professionally and personally. Under deep hypnosis, she began to recall dreams where she felt herself being aboard a flying ship in a room with blue lights, where curious beings were seeking information about her feelings, her emotions, and her sexuality. In another dream, she found herself inside a sterile room with long instrument protruding from her left abdomen. She felt that these beings were somehow removing eggs from her. Using a volunteer spirit guide who spoke through the patient, I uncovered an array of earthbound spirits, many of whom were smokers and drinkers, who were obviously responsible for her many problems, and a very elusive and cocky extraterrestrial. And I had a long confrontation with one of the dark force entities who kept telling me, "You're just not strong enough." It kind of reminded me of the gunfight at the OK Corral. Attachments really had the patient buffaloed, as she kept saying things like, "I'm not good enough, and I feel empty if they leave." Finally, I accomplished what we needed to. We placed a sealing light on her and followed with powerful suggestions. They can really buffalo you. Another case involved a patient with 4 reptilian attachments. Her spirit guide said the patient was also reptilian, and all of them originated from a planet called Modana. These ETs were here to watch over her. I soon found out that her spirit guide was also reptilian, and was soon joined by a human spirit guide. I was told that her soul stays on Earth in a human body, while a reptilian body remains on a spaceship in stasis. Her soul came into her present body without permission of the original occupying soul. No permission. And bonded with this body. After 2 years, the reptilian soul pushed the other soul out. Interesting. The human guide, spirit guide, then said, "Don't consider this a walk-in. Rather, it's a push-out." Obviously, these reptilians can do this. I finally convinced these guys, reptilians, including the guide, to leave, and this was confirmed by the human spirit guide. Still, another patient was told during a psychic reading that he was a walk-in, and he had been a pilot for a ship from Sirius. This patient subsequently had a regression with another hypnotherapist, where he saw himself as a humanoid-type reptilian, with a human-type face, velvety skin, an abundance of emotions, including love and a strong sense of justice. He was captured by evil reptilians from the same planet and taken to another planet, where he was sold and kept in captivity, a dimension of darkness. This patient later had a spontaneous conscious flashback where he felt himself in that reptilian body. And he also recognized someone in his present life to be this very evil reptilian leader who made him suffer so much in that lifetime. The suffering was so intense that part of his soul fragmented and still remains in that very dark place. At this point, the patient came in to see me. I attempted and completed a soul retrieval by having, and I didn't fool around with this one, I just had several archangels march into that dark place and rescue the soul fragment, which then returned and integrated into the patient's existing soul and made her feel complete once again. The patient felt that the evil reptilian leader was very much influenced by dark entities. I encouraged forgiveness of this presently embodied reincarnation of the evil reptilian. Once this was accomplished, the Patient felt a great weight being lifted off. Slide 10, please. I occasionally run into extraterrestrials or even earthbounds who are infested with dark force entities that have attached to them. I accomplish the release of the earthbounds by convincing them to go to the light so they may continue their spiritual journey and balance their karma. Similarly, I convince the ETs to return to where they came from. They're usually pretty logical. If, however, they have dark forces attached, the task of releasement becomes obviously noticeably much more difficult. The earthbounds and ETs who are infested with dark force are extremely hostile. The situation always makes you suspicious that we have the dark forces attached. And the guide is very helpful in confirming this and monitoring their removal. You can shut that off now. I find that I never tire from surprises that I encounter around every corner. In 2009, I had just such an encounter that involved an extraterrestrial activity that occurred in antiquity. When I took a young man in his early 20s back to the cause of a medical problem, he went back to ancient Egypt, a life in ancient Egypt. He arrived on a shuttle from a spaceship at the age of 3, accompanied by nearly 100 other humanoids, as he described them. They also had a large amount of equipment on this ship. He and other workers came from another star system with the express intention of constructing the pyramids. These individuals were genetically modified so they would look much like humans. As a young man, he found himself in charge of a specially designed hovering vehicle, one of several that had the capability of lifting and carrying the massive rock slabs that were used to construct the pyramids. He piloted this single-man hovering vehicle for many years. When I asked how this vehicle accomplished this feat, he said it used a form of anti-gravity energy, which penetrated the entire thickness of the rock and connected to the spaceship shuttle, making the rock an extension of the ship until the rock was placed in the position with exact precision. I was given a similar description of pyramid construction by another patient in regard to the Great Pyramid in Giza. When I took this person back to the cause of persistent dreams, he saw himself inside this Great Pyramid during its construction. Under hypnotic regression, he again saw himself in this life in ancient Egypt. He was a spiritual ruler at that time. And I asked, how were these stones put into position? I mean, here's another chance of finding out this great information. And he said it was with help from friends of the Egyptians, who he described as other life forms. He said they used devices with some form of energy to lift the rocks and place them in position. And the Egyptian workers mostly worked on the inside of the pyramids. And this particular case is very interesting. Some time ago, I saw an 8-year-old boy who was really sharp. And his father took him in to see me because he was very enthralled with what this kid's been doing through the years. The boy had claimed to have a conscious memory of a life on another planet called Panzana. And he had been talking about this and drawing maps related to this since he was like 4 years old. The names and locations of the areas on these maps have been consistent over the years. And his father shared a very interesting story with me. He said when his son was 3, he went into his playroom and there was toys strewn all over the place. And, a typical father, he says, oh my God. So he went down and started picking up toys. And of course, the 3-year-old got all excited and upset. And finally, the father just stood up, made a few comments, but as he did that, he was looking around the room, and all of a sudden, something dawned on him. All of a sudden, he noticed there was an exact geometric pattern of all the toys, just like a crop circle. And the boy looked up at him at 3 years old and said, "That's what I'm trying to tell you." So, under hypnosis, we took this little 8-year-old back to a life in Pala, a planet besieged by war and disease. At the age of 21, he and 2 others were chosen to man a space shuttle to look for help from another planet in the galaxy called Panzana. The shuttle made it to Panzana but had problems and ended up crashing in their desert. He was the only survivor, and he ended up living a life on Panzana. And he would speak about things like world government, and he had a family. And then he described his death experience, and that was really interesting for an 8-year-old. He said after his soul left his body, his soul went to the light and was greeted by parents from that lifetime. He felt that he was in kind of a paradise and had accomplished the lessons he needed to learn in that life, namely respect for others and confidence in himself. He then said he decided once again to incarnate and choose his parents. That's pretty darn good for this present lifetime. Following this, he then said his soul entered his body when his mother became pregnant, and that a form of foreign energy attached to him at birth. It was the earthbound spirit of a farmer who had lived, I think it was in the state of Connecticut in like 1892. He was 93 when he died. And the boy's spirit guide by the name of Rowick then cut in and said that he had encouraged this attachment to help the boy adapt to this earth life. The spirit guide also said that he had been with this boy in this lifetime on Pala and Panzana, and that he had originally volunteered to be his guide. I thought that was extremely wild that this 8-year-old had this much information. I've also run into extraterrestrials who were stubborn but not hostile. Dr. Baldwin named these kind of extraterrestrials alien colonists. He felt that they're intent on expanding their reach and establishing colonized outposts on other planets. He says they attach so as to exert some degree of control over people's minds. I agree with Dr. Baldwin. They're quite arrogant in regard to their superiority and generally refuse to leave. A few years ago, I encountered such a case. In fact, this guy who came to see me in his mid-30s was sent by his father. His father was the guy who could never speak to anybody, and he was still a happy camper. But this individual was in his mid-30s, and he had chronic epigastric pain, upper part of his abdomen. And he'd been on medication for psychotic episodes and bipolarity for years. Been to psychiatrists all over the place. They'd love to give out prescriptions. Here, take these pills. That's all they know. I discovered an extraterrestrial attachment, and when I asked about his purpose in being here, he says, I feed off his energy. And I said, where? And he's indicating the upper abdomen. And then he volunteered something. He says, I also do mind experiments on him. And then it dawned on me, maybe this is the reason for his psychosis and his bipolarity. Well, then I went into the process of trying to get him to leave. And they were not really successful. He didn't really care about being uninvited, his intrusion, and the problems he's causing this individual to suffer with, and so on. So then I used one of Dr. Baldwin's techniques. And it's a good one. I said, tell me about your planet. Has your planet ever been invaded? Oh yeah, it's been invaded. I said, tell me how that made you feel. And then I related it to what he's doing to this patient. Then it dawns on him. And I finally convinced him to leave. Talked to this guy's father a few months later. He says, why don't you call my son? So I did. No more medication, no more psychosis, no more bipolarity, no more discomfort. What can I tell you? It was awesome. In general, when I ask my patients where the extraterrestrials came from, I'm told faraway galaxy or another star system. But when I press them for the name of their planet, I've gotten a variety of names, such as Nibiru, Modana, Sirius, the blue planet, Sirius B, Pleiades, Mogo, Uranus, Saturn, Venus, Pluto, Pala, Panzana, Fortuna, just to name a few. Okay, now let's talk about cases involving a past lifetime as a famous person. That always gets people's interest. I'm often asked about encountering these kind of patients, and thus far in my hypnotherapy practice, I've had many patients spontaneously go back to somebody who had a very high-profile lifetime, namely Jim Thorpe, Joan of Arc, Mark the Apostle, William James, the father of psychology, Michelangelo, Doc Holliday, Edgar Cayce, Mary Magdalene, and Goliath. I love Goliath. Occasionally, I will receive a gift from a spirit guide, and that's exactly the way they put it. I've got a gift for you. Great, you know. One such gift was making me aware of this walk-through phenomenon. That was really a good gift. I was told that a soul can look over the Akashic records before it incarnates and make a decision to join another soul in the same body to learn a specific lesson from a certain perspective for just a short period of time and then leave and then do a more permanent incarnation. And they said, it's usually a famous person. And I said, why a famous person? And the answer I got was, because that's where the action is. That's where the experience is. And they join with permission of this other soul. You know, when I had Joan of Arc and she was burning at the stake, she had a load of souls within her, including extraterrestrials. And I've even heard this walk through from another guide, from another person too. I'm convinced this is exactly the way it is. You know, we're never going to know how it all works till we're there, but boy, this is a real good glimpse. I couldn't, on Jim Thorpe, I was able to validate everything, boom, 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 his life in the Olympics and so on. I got to a certain point in his personal life and everything went haywire. And I said, well, is this guy him or isn't he? So it explains why historical validation falls short after a certain period of time, because they're gone. And it explains why many people can be that same famous person. How many people claim to be Cleopatra? They may have all been. I'd like to relate an abbreviated history of just one of these famous people that I had. This particular patient went back to a life as a photographer by the name of Edgar Cayce. And I said, let's go back to a significant moment in that life. And he went back to a typical Edgar Cayce trance. When I say typical, I mean later he remembers nothing about the trance. Very typical of Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet. He would never remember anything that he was in trance. And while he was in trance, I thought I would pull a fast one. I have this spur on my ankle. It's a bone spur. And it was a good size, and it was painful. I was chief of surgery for quite a while. I know surgery is not a good answer for that bone spur. So I said, you know, I got this bone spur. What would you do about it? And he gave me this, if you call it a poultice or application, whatever, but it was olive oil, the spice turmeric, and DMSO, dimethyl sulfoxide, which makes it absorb really quickly. You have to clean it good because it'll take bacteria right in with it. And I've been using this stuff for several months, and the spur's getting smaller and smaller. I'm down to about a third or a fourth of what it was. So I consider that pretty neat. And by the way, this patient was born on January 3rd, 1945. The day Edgar Cayce died. I rest my case. Have I ever encountered an earthbound spirit who was famous? Yeah, and it was quite a surprise. The case I'm about to describe is not only unusual, but it still stirs empathetic emotions in me. It relates to a woman in her mid-40s who had psychic gifts and healing powers, and at the same time wrote poetry and fiction tinted with dark romanticism. She had many issues she needed to resolve, one of which was a current block to her writing or creative writing. At the same time, she felt pressured by a mental deadline to finish her writing. She also felt that she was Edgar Allan Poe in another lifetime, which would explain to her why she was obsessed with death and why she would use words correctly that were completely unfamiliar to her. The patient's guide identified much in the way of foreign energy, including a dark force entity and many earthbound spirits. Several of the earthbounds admitted they were responsible for a lot of her problems. And then I said, when I asked for the earthbound spirits, if I asked for any authors in the group please step forward? One step forward. What's your name? Edgar Allan Poe. He said he had been trapped in his thoughts, had not finished his work or earthly lessons, and therefore didn't go to the light. I called for his spirit guide, who then revealed the presence of a good bit of foreign energy within him. At that moment, one more of the patient's guides stepped forward. He said his name was St. Jerome. He said that both Edgar Allan Poe and the patient were responsible for this mental pressure to finish the writing. But the patient herself is causing the blockage, and that's due to the fact that she's afraid of success from a previous life memory. St. Jerome also said that Edgar uses her light, and she sees through his eyes. She loves him because she thinks she is him. I ended up removing all the foreign energy from Edgar Allan Poe and from the patient except for Edgar Allan Poe, and also for 2 ETs, who the guides felt were pretty helpful for her healing power. I then consulted the 3 spirit guides that were there. I often use them for counseling. And I asked, should Edgar go to the light? They said to me that the patient and Edgar Allan Poe had made an arrangement in the astral plane. They said that was prior to this lifetime. They agreed that somehow the patient was to continue Edgar Allan Poe's work and tell people how he was misunderstood, that he was a gentleman, that he respected women, and he wasn't dark. At that moment, I interrupted for a change and said, I suggested that, why doesn't the patient write a biography about Edgar Allan Poe and include all this stuff? Well, Edgar Allan Poe got all excited and about this proposition. And then the guide came forth with the truism that, from the light, he could help her more from the light. At that point, Edgar chooses to go to the light and did so with my help. And his very emotional ascent to the light was confirmed by all 3 guides as tears formed in this patient's eyes. As the session came to a close, the guide spoke of the patient and Edgar Allan Poe sharing other lifetimes and making other agreements in the afterlife. Obviously, they were really close. The patient then underwent her protection with a sealing light. Okay. What do you think my peers, my fellow physicians, think of all this? The witch doctor here, right? Well, most physicians are strictly conventional, I gotta say. However, I have regressed 5 or 6 physicians at least, and their wives, from different states. I think their specialties are podiatry, ENT, anesthesia, general practice, urology, and so on. Okay. And I've got an appointment coming up with an MD who is a professor at Ohio State Medical School. But the feather in my cap, ladies and gentlemen, is I got a shrink, a psychiatrist from New York City coming in. He loved my book, and he heard me on Coast to Coast a few times, and that's a feather, let me tell you. When I get to those guys, because I always work in the conscious mind, and that's not where the problems are. The problems are in the subconscious. I also lecture occasionally at Sunrise Hospital in Las Vegas and try to convince the docs over there to include this kind of therapy in their cancer program, because I really firmly believe every illness has that emotional cause. And if you can expose that emotional cause of the person's cancer to their conscious mind, you can get that immune system back. And once the immune system is back, the chemotherapy and the radiation can do a decent job. And it all makes a lot of sense. As many times they go on with this treatment and they die anyway. Do I consider past life regression a life-altering experience? I mentioned earlier that I have become very passionate about past life regression therapy. I feel it's a profound and life-altering experience. Once an individual is regressed into past lifetimes and sees himself die and be reborn over and over, he can't help undergo a self-realization. He now knows without reservation who he truly is. He's an eternal being. He lives forever. Nothing can ever destroy him. And he knows he's much more than an ego and a physical body. He begins to feel a oneness with the Creator, an inherent connection with everyone and everything in the universe. The daily drama of life becomes less important as he takes on a whole new way of looking at life and death. Has my research changed my personal beliefs? I'd say so. My past life regression research has convinced me that reincarnation, karma, and our real identity as spiritual beings are ultimate truths. The foundation of my Christian upbringing has been expanded to a point where my understanding of spirituality has been tremendously enhanced. My attitudes and perspectives have thus undergone a radical change for the good. And this is evidenced by having much greater joy in life, by having a significant reduction in negative thinking and the negative emotions that follow. My belief system in regard to spiritual entities and the existence of extraterrestrials has been bolstered beyond anything I ever possibly imagined. And at this point in my life, I certainly proved to myself that this experience is my reality, and these entities are very real. You know, whenever I'd be talking to guides or entities at all, they always refer to the patient in the third person. That's pretty important too. It's all proof. In my mind, it's a foregone conclusion that other dimensions do exist and are well beyond our understanding. Once again, I'd like to drive home the fact that I am regularly communicating, interacting with these entities, spiritual and ET entities, through the patient. That this information is coming from them, not me. And just even the stories of descriptions of the planets that I would be getting, the richness of those stories is unbelievable. And all these people have got to be screenwriters and Pulitzer Prize winners to spontaneously come up with information about the planet just like that. Unbelievable stuff. Boom, boom, boom. You know, it'd be impossible to make that stuff up that quickly, spontaneously. My book, I use the subtitle Gnostic Healing for the 21st Century. And I do this because, you know, what I do, what I accomplish by guiding the patient into the mental processes that lead to healing through regression therapy is strikingly similar to an ancient spiritual movement called Gnosticism. You know, the movement proceeded and followed the life of Christ. They were not big and they had very little regard for organized religion. They believed that introspection and contemplation and intuition led to a knowing. And with that knowing, they were able to attain spiritual truths and therefore know God, know their Creator directly, a direct perception of God. No middleman. You don't need a priest, you don't need a minister, just between you and your Creator. They believed in positive thinking. They believed in the power of the mind. They even were aware of the effect of the subconscious mind on the conscious mind. This blew Carl Jung's mind when he first found this out. And they were healers. The Essenes were such a group. And many scholars think that the Dead Sea Scrolls are in reality Essene documents. I could probably go on and on and on. However, even witch doctors get tired occasionally. So let's open it up for questions. I think we're almost at the half-hour level. I guess you can step up here. Before I start the questions, I just have to say one thing. I have to tell you that I was pretty compelled to write my book after all my research. And I just would like to thank somebody who has inspired me and helped me edit the book tremendously, and that's my lovely wife, Nancy, over there. So the... Okay, shoot.
What methods can we each use to prevent ourselves possibly from getting attachments? Because we could be by near negative people, and sometimes they want to attach to us because they don't want us doing our light. Well, or being our light, I mean.
Vulnerability, as I said, there's many ways to be vulnerable. You could be drunk out of your mind. You could be drugged out of your mind. You could be so depressed. You could be emotionally in dire straits. Many ways you can be vulnerable. I'm running about 75% of my patients having attachments. According to Baldwin, anywhere from 70 to 100% of people will get them at some time or another. What I do after I remove these entities, I put a sealing light. What I do is I have them visualize the spark of God within you, which is that golden white spark, and I have them envision it growing larger and larger and flowing through their heart and every cell and subatomic particle within their body, filling you with golden white light, and then surrounding you about an arm's length around you like a glistening bubble of golden white light. And I tell them to repeat that visualization the rest of their life, at least 5 times a day. It takes about, 5 seconds. When you get up in the morning, before each meal, before you go to bed, just like you're saying your prayers. Same difference. And that's your best bet for keeping it. They detest light. Whether you're going to get rid of them at that time, but you're certainly going to cripple their activity. People carry on these entities and have no clue. Sometimes they're very comfortable with these entities. Like I say, some children have such horrible childhoods. I've heard such nasty stories of kids being raised with horrible parents. I had one guy who was blinded in Vietnam and comes back home and his mother said, "That's the reason you were blinded is because all the bad things you did." I mean, really bad stuff. But all I can say is, lead as best a life as you can. Try not to put yourself in vulnerable situations. And, after all my experience with everything I'm doing, I find it's all about how you treat people. It's that simple.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so why is it that, what are the entities, both extraterrestrial, terrestrial, non-ascended, so they're earthbound. They're earthbound because basically they have unfinished business. Is that what that is? And if that's so, then what are they getting out of the process of causing all the ailments and pains, and how is it that the negativism feeds them in the first place? I'm a little confused by the whole process.
Remember, we have different entities. The earthbounds are individual souls who decline going to the light for different reasons. It could be a mother very worried about her children, wants to hang around in the astral plane and keep an eye on them. It could be somebody out of revenge. It could be a lover who wants to hang around and keep an eye on his love. It could be somebody out of confusion, not knowing they're dead.
So it's our choice to stay here then?
What's seen is, from the millions of cases of people who have died, near-death experiences, and come back, and regressions when they go through these death experiences, they see themselves heading towards this light. But many times, and they're given a choice, yes, they're given a choice. You're drawn to the light because as you get closer and closer to the light, it becomes brighter and brighter, but it doesn't hurt your eyes, and you begin to feel the love from the light. You feel the peace, the feeling of belonging, because that's where you lived.
Right.
That's your home, and there are loved ones there welcoming you.
Right.
But there are instances of lots of souls that don't get there for various reasons, and the astral plane's loaded with these souls.
Yeah.
Some remain in the astral plane, and if you're an addict, you look for somebody to make them an addict so you can feel the drugs, that kind of thing. Now you got the dark forces. They're the ones that want to make you feel really rotten. Seduction and destruction. ETs, they have an agenda. They want to do experiments. They want to keep an eye on things. And a lot of them keep an eye on their own, coming from their own planet. We're now in the human incarnation. But you have to remember, too, this is a monkey wrench that is thrown into the karmic cycle. Karma is a very strong sense of justice. What goes around comes around. However, when you have an entity like an earthbound, his desires become your desires. So you're not really totally culpable for your actions. it really is a monkey wrench.
It'd be an interesting defense, wouldn't it?
And it's a violation of our basic gift, which is free will.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that all plays out.
Right.
All I know is I'm finding out more and more, and it's not so simple. And I think, you know, somehow you have to lead as good a life as you can.
Wow.
I think it's all about love.
Yeah.
And treating others well. And there's a lot of darkness in our planet.
Amen.
Amen.
Thanks for your work.
Okay, it's my pleasure. Hello there.
Good afternoon. Two related questions.
A little louder, please.
Two related questions.
Yeah.
Do you think, have you done enough regressions that you can recognize attachments before you regress people?
I get a pretty good indication. This is the thing. I love using spirit guides because it's a shortcut. William Baldwin, excellent guy. He did unbelievable work. But he did things a little differently, and he used the patient and he would interview each entity, and he would try to save the dark entities. I leave that to Michael the Archangel. I'm more interested in helping my patient, and the guide makes it a lot quicker. Just like hypnosis is a shortcut, regressive hypnosis is a shortcut to wisdom. You can spend years of conscious introspection, and you could accomplish the whole thing in one session, hypnotically. Well, by the same token, working with these entities, you can accomplish so much by using the guides. That's why I go to great pains to get a guide, one way or another, because they answer the questions. And I'll say, okay, he has 4 earthbound spirits, and they're responsible for depression, anxiety, and this and that, and so on. And when I finish all that, then I'll say, okay, to the guide, are there any lifetimes that have contributed to this problem? They say, yeah, 3. Okay, then we'll go back. 1, 2, 3. I mean, it's a tremendous shortcut. And I'm able to accomplish so much more and get validation by very powerful beings. And the guides are very powerful. So, yeah.
Is it likely any of our elected officials have significant attachments?
Oh boy, don't get me started. That's what, I think that's what Baldwin would have called pancaking effect. They got one on top of another, on top of another, and so on. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Wanted to know if you've had any feedback regarding why spirit guides or your higher self would be so susceptible to letting in dark forces if the body or the personal soul does not want the dark forces in their life.
The guides aren't able to do that for some reason. I mean, they're there to help you, not to necessarily protect you from entities attaching. They're like parasitic infestations. If you make yourself very vulnerable, then you become open to them, and they will take advantage and jump in. We're never going to know all the answers and how it really works until we're there. But the guides are loving, and they're as protective as they can be, and they will guide us and help us, especially if we ask for that help. If we don't ask for the help, they're still going to be there, but they can't help as much. But they can't prevent these entities from attaching. And when these entities attach, they draw energy from you. The guides don't. They have their own source of energy, just like angels have their own source of energy.
A real quick question you can answer yes or no. Some lifetimes have simultaneous lives existing at the same present time. Have you gotten any feedback or any...
You mean parallel lifetimes?
Yes. Let's say that you could have 10 personalities existing in this time frame or this timeline.
Well, the soul can split into one or more bodies. They call this a parallel lifetime. I've had patients like that. It's very interesting. And they do this, again, to learn certain lessons from different perspectives. And sometimes those lives overlap, or they may be in the same incarnation. It's interesting, the one particular case I had, I would ask, again, I get the information from the guide. Has this patient had any parallel lifetimes? I got a yes. And then I said, currently? I got another yes. And then I try things. I say to the patient, deeply hypnotized, can you get into the mind of this other person? And all of a sudden, she was there. And she says, I'm looking out at the ocean. She was looking through a window, and she was a he. She's in a mind of a he, the other half of her soul. And she's, or rather he's very depressed because he'd recently been divorced and he's got all kinds of problems, so she's feeling all those feelings. I did a little bit of validation on that particular case because that particular individual, we found out as we went along, was a lawyer and was in a small town in California and lived right on the ocean and on a street, and there was exactly that street on that particular town, and he had a practice about 20 miles away, and I thought hard and deep on it, and I thought, I don't think I should call this guy because he's not going to believe much of what I'm going to say, you know. But yeah, and I think it's very, very real.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi. I was just curious. I assume you've read the Owaspy. Is that true? The Owaspy Bible? I mean, it's because I thought perhaps you had been somewhat guided and shaped in your concept of attachment from that work.
What does that particular Bible say about attachments?
Oh, it goes on and on about attachments, and it would probably give you some new nomenclature too, because it talks about fetals who reattach, to the earth, and it talks about the astral plane and all the different forms of attachment, and I kind of imagine you would enjoy it.
Well, that's good. I'll have to look that up.
Do.
Thank you.
Hi. Did I understand that you're communicating with attachments? And if that's so, how is that taking place, do you suppose?
How does it take place?
You are communicating with the attachment.
The attachments are somehow wedged into the aura of the patient. Some more deeply, if they're very, very deeply, then they have a full possession. Otherwise, they're more superficially attached, from what I understand. And when I communicate with them, just like Baldwin, I am talking directly to them and they answer through the patient. And as I said, the patient will grimace and smile and do everything else as the entity talks to me. They take on the whole personality of the entity as they speak. And sometimes you've got many entities. And if it's a very evil, dark force, that's why I said that one particular one had the most evil smile. And I had one guy, I could never get to first base. He just growled for about a half hour. Snarled and growled and growled and snarled. I couldn't get any answers.
Kind of like Cheney, huh?
So, this is a strange field, but I'm in it and up to my teeth. But it's very real.
But it's verbalization from the patient,
yeah,
is that correct?
Yeah, and it's therapeutic.
And it's just one attachment at a time, is that right?
I take them one at a time. If there's a whole bunch, I'll say, well...
What's the longest you've worked with a patient?
Pardon?
What's the longest that you've worked with a patient?
2 to 3 hours is my usual, but I've had some 4-hour sessions.
No, I mean in days, in years, in weeks, and months. Because I've gone to the VA for 10 years, and I didn't improve much at all.
I usually accomplish a tremendous amount in one session.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, if it's a addiction type thing, then you may need several sessions.
Well, I'm going to AA for 30 years, and I'm still addicted.
Okay. Next, please. Hi. You're welcome, Syke. Go ahead.
I think I'll be asking the same question that he was also asking, and that is, are you available for appointments during the conference?
Oh, God. I've got 3 individuals already.
What area are you in?
Where do you live?
I'm in California.
Where?
California.
California.
LA County.
I've actually seen people from every state in the union. This is crazy.
And do they fly to you, or do you fly to them?
No, they fly in. Yeah, it's amazing. I might be able to work something out, just, you know.
I would definitely like an
But
appointment.
if not, you might consider driving to Vegas. It's not that far.
Vegas is not too far from me either.
Yeah,
All right.
might be better. Okay. Hi.
Hi. Does autism and schizophrenia always associated with these entities?
I think we can usually, I haven't had too many autistics, and I'm not sure how well I could hypnotize them.
Yeah.
Schizophrenics, I think that's definitely something we can work with, and a lot of it I think has to do with alien attachments. They're experimental stuff that they've done with them.
How about things like mercury poisoning or other kind of poisoning? Does that also bring them on?
Does that bring them on?
Yeah, does that make an opportunity for them to attach?
I think any type of poisoning will weaken you and put you in a vulnerable position.
And diseases like cancer or like MRSA, the deadly infection, do they use those as anchors to attach with?
I think once an emotional cause has done its damage and you're suffering, you're much more vulnerable for attachments. Yeah.
So then when you remove these entities, then those symptoms go away?
You may have tremendous improvement, yeah. Yeah, maybe, because you got to remember too, you pick up the ailments of the earthbound spirit. If he had cancer, you may likely have that same cancer.
Are you always successful with patients?
I would say I'm fairly successful. I'm not 100% certainly. Like I said, this is very new territory. I'm doing the best I can in terms of trying to figure out what's needed, what's not needed. I think that the combination of taking you back to causes and in terms of memory and also finding out what's present and what's contributing to the situation, both of them need to be handled in order to get a comprehensive treatment for the patient.
And what cases are you not successful with? What type of a case? Is that brain damage or something like that?
I don't know. I've been surprised at every turn of the road. I get a lot of cases that are extremely successful. I can't just off the top of my head tell you one particular type of case that gives me more of a headache than others. I get a lot of good feedback from patients. I learned, though, that you've got to repeat this visualization of the golden white light as often, as I said, at least 5 times a day, because they will re-jump on you again. It's, who do you consult with when you need questions answered? And that's why I use spirit guides. So I get really good answers, especially if I have a master spirit on board. They are very, very helpful. Because I can't really call up, the AMA and get some answers on that. Hi.
Hi, thank you for your wonderful work. I'm wondering if you're aware of any correlations between physical parasites like roundworms or blood parasites or mad cow disease, and the spiritual or the non-physical parasites that you're talking about?
I don't see any real relationships there. One's in a spiritual dimension and the other is physical.
Okay. And are there people that are unhypnotizable?
Yeah, there's a few that just won't shut off their mind. I'm pretty successful. I see most patients of mine have never been hypnotized. There's a few that just can't concentrate. You need to be, cooperative. You need to be able to concentrate. Like I'm going to be using all your senses, and I'm going to describe things, and I need you to visualize that, see it. Like the ocean, you've been there, you know what it smells like, you know what it sounds like, be there again. Don't be thinking, geez, I heard a car, I don't think I'm under, you're thinking another thought, okay? So focus exactly on what's being said, and you'll just roll right into trance. We use words like sleep, deep sleep, trance, and so on, but you're never really asleep. The conscious mind is always awake. And that's the beauty of the procedure. You have a dual consciousness, because the conscious mind is what's observing what the subconscious brings up. It's able to evaluate it and understand that your problems from misinterpretation, misperception of events that happened a long time ago, they don't pertain to your life now, so you can release them. And sometimes it requires forgiveness. But once you do that, bingo, you're healed. You no longer have this hang-up, this emotional or physical situation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for coming and teaching us today.
You're welcome.
I'd like to share just a little experience with what you might consider a earth-bound spirit. But my son died 4.5 years ago. And
I'm sorry, what? Say it again?
My son died 4.5 years ago.
Wow, I'm sorry.
I took care of him. It went on 24/7 for 7 years, and so I was very close to him. But he pops in every now and then. He's not earthbound, but just a little example of what once in a while I sleep in his t-shirts still because they're
you say pops in dreams?
Well, no, I'll tell you. I sleep in his t-shirts because they're cotton and it feels good, and I was putting the clean laundry away and folding it, putting it away, and he's there, and he says, "Mom." He says, "Mom, throw that away." He was trying to teach me the subtlety of clarifying all of my thoughts. I knew what he was trying to do.
He may be attached.
Well, he says, "Mom, throw that away." And I was hesitating. I didn't really want to. But it was one he had, and it said, Advanced Technical Center. He said, he was playing with me, see, he jokes. He says, "Mom, throw that away. You don't need that." He said, "I am the Advanced Technical Center." And he was only teasing. I knew that because, of course. But no, he's told me. I mean, I know he's happy. He fishes. He tells me what it's fishing like there. But he's not stuck here. But I know that he comes in once in a while. And I really only wanted to share this for people who are really grieving with their loved ones because he's not earthbound. He's not stuck.
One of the things I do, I've had many people who've lost loved ones. I had a physician who not only lost his wife, but he had to pull the plug on her. And when she was dying, she finally woke up from this coma, and he told her, and they had already pulled all the IVs and everything, and he told her, you're dying, and she says, "I don't want to die." And then she went back in the coma again, and she finally died. So he was fraught with guilt. But what I do with these individuals, and again, the guide is very helpful, I'd say, "Can you please have this particular spirit visit with them?" Or I'll take them into a garden, I'll have them sit on a bench, and I'll say, "Someone you'd like to see may just show up." And they will come. And they will have a very tearful reunion, but it will put to rest so many things. And it's almost been like 95% successful as far as how many times I've been able to do that. It's very powerful.
That is wonderful. And I was almost worried for a while about keeping him here when I should let him go. And so I asked him about that once, and he said, "No." He said, "I can multitask, but he'll joke with me." And so I'm just saying that I don't think he's stuck in the least. He'll maybe come and tell me something once in a while if he thinks I need to know, but it's not like I don't talk to him every day. I just wanted to share that.
That was great. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
This is an awesome talk. I do a lot of work, sort of what you're doing, but on the EPFX machine. And I'm wondering what the significance of colored entities are, and
Significance of what?
Significance of colored entities.
Colored?
Colored, yeah, red or blue. Would you know?
You talk about entities themselves?
Entities themselves that are attached.
That are colored?
Yes.
That's a new one on me. Red and blue.
Rather than black or blue or red?
The only colors I've run into as far as the light and that has to do with extraterrestrials. They often have a different light that they go to, and I have the impression all these lights are connected to our light, the afterlife, But as far as actual colors of entities, I'm not aware of that at all. Where did you come up with that one?
It appears on the EPFX machine in the aura.
You got me on that one. All I know is that, my reality is my experience, and this is what I run into. And I've seen thousands of patients, and all I know is that my thrust is therapeutic. I'm trying like heck to help people. And that's why I don't adhere to all Baldwin's ideas in terms of trying to help the dark forces recover. I let Michael make decisions on that one. It's out of my ball game. But I wish I could help you on that, but I can't.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Are all entities harmful?
Are all of them harmful?
Are all entities that are attached harmful?
Well, they're all drawing energy. Any attached entities are drawing energy from you. That's not a good thing. Even some loving entity, like if a child hangs on to his mother, or a mother hangs on to the child, they're better off going to the light and continuing their spiritual journey. They've got karma to work out yet. They need to, and they do it by incarnation. And you can incarnate on any planet. Life is a lot easier in those planets. Earth is a tough place. And if you learn your lesson here, you learn it well. But many times you don't learn it. And I've heard that many times. Earth is not an easy place. It's a third dimension, and there's a lot of darkness here. But when you are able to fight through all that, you can accomplish a lot. A lot.
Thank you.
You got it. Thank you. Hi.
Hey. Are ghosts a manifestation of some of these spirits, and if so, how?
A ghost is another word for a discarnate spirit. Discarnate spirit, or an earthbound who's still in the astral plane hanging around. Poltergeists and so on. And sometimes they'll haunt a particular area. They can be communicated with too, and sometimes they'll attach, but many times they'll just stay in a particular area thinking that they can't leave until something finally occurs, and eventually all souls will head to the light. But yeah, same thing.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're almost done. I just want you to know it's been a great pleasure.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah. How'd you sneak in there? Go ahead.
Isn't this very similar to the Thetans on that Scientology believes in?
Similar to what?
The Thetans that are attached to everybody that the Scientologists believe in. Hundreds of ETs, they call them Thetans.
I'm not familiar with what Scientologists do.
But they all say it's like Thetan, Thetan. That's what they try to get rid of.
I don't know where they get their info, but one thing I dislike is when people act like this is the way it is, guys. That's it. I'll admit when I don't know something, but what I'm knowing is what I'm finding out. And I don't know where they got their information, but when they say this is the way it is, that turns me off. So I got to have some kind of proof. You can't prove scientifically things that are spiritual, that's for sure. But you can sure give it a good shot. Again, it's been really great, guys, and I appreciate that.
Dr. C.V. Tramont.
Thank you, old dude. Just experience time travel. What do I find to be the major causes of these feelings and problems? My research has shown that people's feelings and their physical and emotional problems are due to one or both of two specific situations. The first has to do with the resurgence of a very emotional memory that was previously buried very deeply in the subconscious mind. This rather prominent memory resurfaced to the forefront of the subconscious mind because of an event or a group of events that occurred in one's present life that acted as a trigger. This very emotional memory is now in a position to unknowingly program the conscious mind in a very adverse way. This negative programming has a definite effect upon a person's emotions and physiologic body functions, resulting in undue suffering. A good example is that of a man who is in his 50s that I saw. This individual could never speak to a person he didn't know without panicking. I mean, his hands would shake, his voice would shake, he'd stutter, he'd have instant palpitations, perspiration, hyperventilation, you name it. The guy was a mess. He had been to many doctors for many years, psychiatrists, all types of therapists. Nobody could even come up with a diagnosis. The guy's in his 50s. Obviously, this limited him tremendously in a personal and professional way. I simply took him back to the cause. He went back to the 1920s. He's a 5-year-old boy playing outside his grandfather's house. His parents had been killed in an accident, so he lives with his grandfather. A sedan pulls up. A man and a woman are in the car. They ask for directions. As he approaches the vehicle, they grab him and they kidnap him. Now he's in an abandoned farmhouse, and they're trying to extract money from his grandfather. Well, he has no money, so they give up and they finally leave. The little boy finds his way to a road, gets picked up by a trucker. The police get him, and they finally take him home. And now his grandfather looks at him and said, "From this day forward, you will never speak to strangers." And from that moment on, that very emotional memory was engraved deeply into his subconscious mind. Something in his present life triggered it, and it probably was the first stranger he ever met. I spoke to his wife several weeks after. This guy was happier than you could ever imagine. He opened 2 businesses. She said he spoke to more people today than he has in his entire life. I have found that the other major cause of people's problems is directly related to attached entities. That's right, entities who are attached. I find that I'm always learning in this business, and I run into surprises at every turn of the road. My first encounter with an attached entity, and I didn't know beans about attached entities when I was involved in this, was by accident. What I was doing was I was regressing this individual who was a writer, but he had a block in his writing, and he had this tremendous interest in feudal Japanese culture, their fighting and their literature and all this business. It seemed to interfere with him, so I took him back to the cause of his interest in this. Went back to a life as a Japanese feudal farmer's son, about 16, 17 years old, wanted to join the Emperor's army, and so he did. Now he's marching with the Emperor's army, and this individual I'm regressing, his name was Edgar. And so all of a sudden I heard these tremendous horse hoof beats coming through the ranks, and a bunch of very fierce-looking guys on horses with spears came in, and he caught a spear in the abdomen. Now he's dying in the mud, and he's really upset. He's yelling out, "Where's the honor? I never got to fight." And then he says, "And Edgar won't do what I want him to do." And I felt like saying, "Excuse me?" You know? And then all of a sudden it dawned on me, and I said, "Well, how long have you been with him?" He said, 3 years, or I'm sorry, since he was 3 years old. And a decision, rational decision, the patient's able to release the effect. I let the patient know that they'll be protected from any physical or emotional discomfort through my suggestions, and I will also have spiritual protection for them by filling them full of light. I'll inform the patient I'll be working through their higher self, and I'll have them call forth their spirit guide so I may communicate with them. Unless I'm asked, I really don't discuss entity attachments during the interview. Rather, I ask the patient to be open to what occurs, to stay relaxed, and kind of go with the flow. I do this purposely, so as not to lead him. Most patients are very surprised when we discover attachments. And I discuss this thoroughly following the session. I find that this technique adds an element of candor and genuineness to the process. I also then discuss hypnosis, the process of deepening, since most patients have never been hypnotized, about 99% of them. I then gently take the patient into the altered state of deep hypnosis and attempt to communicate with their spirit guide through the patient. The guide speaks through the patient. Any entity speaks through the patient. And the patient will wonder, where did that come from? Let's have slide 2, please. Why do I like working through the patient's spirit guide? Well, the spirit guide is a non-physical being who has agreed to volunteer or be assigned to an incarnated human being for the purpose of helping him. Many such guides are sent from the light to help and advise when advice is requested. Many of these guides seem to specialize in specific situations in people's lives, but there's usually one special guide that comes forth when you call for them in an altered state of consciousness. And these guides are not attached, and they have their own source of energy. Once the patient has been hypnotically taken to their higher self, and I have them go to their higher self because that's where their greatest wisdom resides, I then have them call forth their guide. I communicate then through the patient. It's kind of a form of channeling. I ask for the guide's name and ask if he'll be willing to help resolve the patient's problems. They usually have unconditional love for this individual. The guides appear to retain their human personalities as well. Some are humorous, some are all business. Most are very cooperative. Some make it clear that it would not be in the best interest of the patient to revisit that lifetime at this time. Heck, I've even been admonished for continuing extensive questioning, being told that I'm diverting energy from its proper place. I'd like now to tell you about a way in which I was able to prove to myself that these spirit guides are truly genuine and the information they provide is accurate. Before I tell you about this, though, before I tell you how I designed the model for this spirit guide experiment, I'd like to give you some background related to one of my earliest cases, one that became a catalyst that helped catapult me right into past life regression therapy. This case involved a 48-year-old GYN patient of mine. I saw her for the first time when she said she was having these recurrent nightmares that were going on for many, many years, and they were getting worse and more frequent, and she'd wake up screaming. I thought this would be a good one to regress, and she was very willing, and we then took her back under deep hypnosis to the cause of the problem. She went back to at least 6 lifetimes, and they were all related to the nightmares and the phobias. And by, again, airing out these events to her conscious mind, she was able to realize these occurrences were all in the past, had nothing to do with her present life, and was able to release the effect. And the negative programming was wiped out. And she was no longer having any problems with nightmares or anxiety or phobias. But the big thing here is the follow-up research. That was my baptism of fire. I stumbled through the session. I finally achieved resolution by sending this individual, this entity, to the light. And then I started learning as much as I could about spirit releasement therapy. And it's quite a complicated situation. I soon devised methods where I could identify and rid the patient of these entities. As time went on, I soon came to the conclusion that if one is to carry on comprehensive past life regression therapy, he must also be prepared to carry out releasement of all attached entities. My research has yielded results which are very similar to the great pioneer of spirit releasement, the late Dr. William Baldwin. He believed there were many different types of entities, both human and non-human. The human ones seem to imprint their emotional and physical ailments upon the host. The non-human entities are there for the purposes of completing their agenda. Many times the patient's issues are due to both. Let's have slide 1, please. The most common attached human entities include earthbound spirit attachments. These are disembodied human spirits. They're the consciousness that survives after a person dies. The spirit declines going to the light and joins the living person for various reasons. Next, there are mind or soul fragments. These are fragmentations of a living person's consciousness that have separated from that individual and did not return, but rather attached to another person. These usually are from traumatic circumstances. For instance, a little girl being molested, say sexually. All of a sudden, part of her consciousness goes out of body and is across the room watching from the other side, unemotionally involved. And many times that fragment doesn't return. Dr. Baldwin also got into many things like subpersonalities and alter personalities and past life personalities. I'm not going to cover those because it's going to be too much, and we want to keep it relatively easy to understand, and besides there's a lot of material here that's very interesting to you. The next would be terminated pregnancies, and I'm sure there are a lot of nurses who assisted on abortions who are probably loaded with these souls that have attached to them. And then we have the non-human entities. And in there we've got the extraterrestrial beings, and we've got dark force entities. And we're going to get into those in pretty good detail. Before I go on, I just have to share a comment from a cousin who's somewhat of a comedian. After I explain what I'm presently doing, he looks at me kind of funny and says, "So you went from baby doctor to witch doctor?" What happens when I see patients? Okay, well, I carry out a lengthy interview, at which time I have the patient describe his or her issues in great detail. Then I develop an impression or a feeling regarding their belief system and how open they are to reincarnation. In the process of doing this, I talk about the validation of reincarnation, historical validation, the phenomenon of xenoglossy, where individuals speak a foreign language unknown to them, and the almost identical descriptions of the afterlife that come from millions, millions of people who've been regressed, and also millions of people who've had near-death experiences. And then, of course, there are also regressing two individuals unbeknownst to each other to the same lifetime and identifying the same scenario. I then explain my philosophy and beliefs regarding physical and emotional problems. And I truly believe every physical and every emotional problem has an emotional cause, and it's buried deep in the subconscious. And once you are able to air that out to the conscious mind, who makes a distinction of time, do that, and that'll overcome their video. And then how about knocking it off? We'll do the same thing. We'll go back to the blank, and then they do the video. What if they see on my pimples? You're already into the microphone. Is he up there already?
Hey, welcome back, everybody.
He has his intro.
Our next speaker is Dr. C.V. Tramont.
Did you tell me when?
When Dr. Tramont completed his tour after Desert Storm,
he's going to be over this
he became familiar with the work of Brian Weiss. And some of you may know that work because it went very deeply into the realities of reincarnation.
He speaks fluent Russian.
And the ramifications of what that means to all of us and what it can mean. And Dr. Tramont got really excited about this healing potential, and he set out to prove or disprove to himself just how powerful was this idea of reincarnation, and just how much could it actually heal. And when I read his new book, From Birth to Rebirth, guys, I started turning the pages. I went through the night. I didn't put it down. I didn't sleep the night. I read it cover to cover.
I got so many
exciting
books.
book.
I got 11 altogether.
I called him the next morning. I
and
said,
two-step
would you please consider coming? And discussing your journey and your discoveries with the Congress. And you know what? We're all really fortunate because he said yes. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. C.V. Tramont.
You calling me? Hey. Thanks a lot, Bob. I guess there are people out there. Okay. Well, good afternoon. My name's Chuck Tramont. Okay. Microphone people. I need an elevation here. I'll try a little louder. My name's Chuck Tramont, and yes, I am a physician. And you notice I didn't say retired physician. And the reason is I'm still caring for patients. If one includes the time I spent in training in obstetrics and gynecology, my many years in practice, and the several years I was on active duty with the Air Force during a couple of wars, one could say I've been a hands-on doc for 38 years. And during that time, I performed thousands of surgeries, delivered thousands of babies. And I tell you this to shine a light on the contrast to what I'm doing now. And what I'm doing now may challenge the belief system of many of you. It comes under the heading of past life regression therapy. Many will ask, why am I doing this kind of work? My answer is very simple, because it works. It works so well that I find that I am quite passionate about what I do, and I get as big a thrill from changing people's lives for the better as I did bringing healthy new lives into this world in spite of medical complications. Material that I'm going to present may truly shock some of your belief systems. However, you must understand that this material is what my research has brought forth. It came from my patients, not from me. So I ask you to be open-minded and try to understand why work like this can excite one and make one passionate about carrying out this kind of therapy. Most people in this room have heard about alien abductions, am I right? Well, today I'm going to cover a good bit of information which comes from my patients under deep hypnosis. A large part of the material I'm going to present is going to be present not only a new wrinkle for many of you, but it may blow the minds of some of you. And what I'm speaking about here is alien attachments. Extraterrestrial beings who in some way attach themselves to a living human being without their knowledge, so as to carry out an agenda. Quite often it follows an alien abduction, but not always. Before we get into this rather exciting and unusual arena, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about what I do. Why do people come to me? Well, the simplest is number one, which would be to eliminate fears, phobias, anxieties, as well as undesirable habits, addictive tendencies that are detrimental to one's physical and emotional health and vitality. This can be accomplished with deep hypnosis and very positive suggestions to the subconscious. I hate when it does that. To resolve emotional and physical problems. This can be helped by utilizing, again, deep hypnosis and positive suggestions. However, if regression techniques are included as part of this therapy, the success rate of eliminating emotional and physical problems escalates dramatically. Why is this so? Simply because the subconscious mind is a virtual reservoir of complete and intricately detailed memories of one's life experiences, regardless of when they occurred, whether it be the present or the past. These experiences are like computer programs that condition our physical and emotional responses to everything life has to offer, everything that comes through to our consciousness through our senses. The subconscious mind not only recalls every moment of every life you've ever lived, but also integrates this information so that it interfaces and many times overrides our conscious thoughts by giving us a specific attitude and emotional feeling about everything in life, thus laying the groundwork of our personality and giving credence to the idea that we are the sum total of all our previous personalities. Of paramount importance here is the fact that the distinction of time when an event took place is conspicuously absent when the subconscious mind files these memories away. So in some ways, we're like robots, giving in to the easier thought that may have been laid down for us centuries ago. Therefore, a recall of a negative incident, which was filed away with a lot of emotion hundreds of years ago, can affect the subconscious to the same degree as something which has just occurred, thus allowing the faulty, negative programming to affect a person's conscious mind and dominate their present personal life without really relating to it. 3, to rid themselves of nightmares, to explain the meaning of recurrent dreams. 4, to explain deja vu feelings. This is when you have this unbelievable feeling of intense familiarity with a person, a place, a thing, or an activity, when there really hasn't been any experience relating to it to account for it. 5, to resolve relationship issues. 6, to understand and remove blocks to a person's moving forward, both in his professional and personal life. 7, to deal with grief. 8, there are always those who are just curious, who want to know more about other lifetimes and talents they may have had in other lifetimes.